This better? Yay! All right. Is that too loud? Turn it down just a little bit then. We've got 39 cities and 3 nations joining us this evening. Woohoo! Let's see, who doesn't have an Israeli flag? Wave your Israeli flags. Let's see your Israeli flags. Everyone have one? Woohoo! All right, good job. Before we begin, I just want to make a couple of quick comments. Jill, can you put that one picture up? As you know, many of us, or some of us were in Washington, D.C. You can see right in the middle in the gray suit is Maria Cantwell, the senator for this state. And this is some of the Washington group who were in her office. And Maria Cantwell she's fantastic. She is the only senator that actually meets with us. Usually you're just meeting with aides, but we really appreciate Maria Cantwell visiting us. We have a lot of young adults with us at this one too. It's always great to get the young adults involved. But we had a wonderful meeting. It was a wonderful event in D.C. Like I said, we had Vice President Mike Pence speak to us. We had Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We had Ambassador John Bolton. We had the Israeli ambassador, David Friedman. I mean, just a lot of high-powered speakers. It was a wonderful time. And we're very fortunate tonight to have Randy Neal, the regional director for CUFI here. Let's give Randy a big hand, too. Yay, Randy. I've known Randy Neal, golly, for what, 10 years? I don't know, 8 years? At least 10 years, something like that. And he's been the regional director ever since I've known him, but I think your territory's expanded more states. You're like the whole western United States, the whole country. Yay. Well, I just love Randy Neal, his wife, family. I met his son for the first time. I hadn't met your son before until this last D.C. trip. But the thing I like about Randy, he is one of the most passionate people when it comes to Israel. I love it when he speaks. He's to me personally, he's one of the best speakers CUFI has. I really believe that. And he's got a heart of gold. And all the work that he does. I mean, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes things that I know you probably do that people aren't even aware of. But we've had a pastor here that was on a pastor trip that we went on to Israel. But let's give a big hand to Randy Neal. Yay, Randy.
So maybe, about a fifth maybe. Okay. And there's something else that I can rarely say also, but I can say it I've said it before when I was in this church, and I can say it again tonight with all honesty and authenticity. If you do not have a home church, and if you're trying to find a home church that is absolutely unwaveringly, staunchly pro-Israel, you are in that church right now. And so I encourage you to give them a test drive. And I'm getting a lot of feedback. If we can dampen these monitors down a little bit, it's distracting me. It's like listening to my speakerphone when somebody on the other end has their speakerphone on. So tonight, I have to confess, and Pastor Mark is right. I'm the Western Regional Coordinator for CUFI. I was hired by Pastor John Hagee in 2006. I'm the senior staffer. And we started with 412 members. I'll show you a short overview video that'll kind of bring you up to speed and connect some dots as well. But, when Pastor Mark invites me to come here, it's a twisted blend of just inspiration and honor and quaking intimidation. Because I know, the man could do a 6-week study series on a letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And so, he drills down deep, and I was trying to reconcile it with that. And as we were in the office at El Shaddai today, a young woman came by, and I met her briefly, and I don't know how many people know her, but I won't make a spectacle out of her. But her name was Leah, and she was on her way to Microsoft, and she was going to teach a bunch of these folks at Microsoft how to boil water. She signed up to become a chef, and she wants to teach how to cook. And so she's going to Microsoft to teach people how to boil water. And the point that I'm trying to make is there are people in there that know how to build firewalls. They know how to write code. They know how to crack code. They know how to stay 1 or 2 steps ahead of the hackers that have ominous intentions. but a lot of them don't know how to boil an egg. And so I have to remind myself that even though you might tune in if you're listening halfway around the world, and you might sit at the feet of Pastor Bilch for, decades and years, and you're used to him drilling down deep and serving you up a porterhouse steak, well, tonight we're just going to go over how to boil some water. And so, I hope that you'll be inspired, because I don't care how mature you are in your faith, how, what degree you've got of sheepskin hanging on your wall from whatever seminary you went to. We all reach seasons where we need to scrape the carbon off of our spark plugs sometimes. We all reach seasons where, we can close our eyes and get on our knees and turn off all the sound, and we still have trouble hearing the dial tone sometimes. And I just think that it's important to just do a cursory overview and just scratch the surface and be reminded that everything that God is doing to and through Israel is to get our attention. He's using Israel to reveal and honor him, to reveal and glorify himself, and I believe that he's using Israel as a line in the sand, that you either believe his word as the unwavering truth and the promises that he makes in it. He is not just a promise keeper, because he makes promises that demand miracles to be kept. And so tonight we're just going to do a cursory overview and just be reminded that our faith rests in a God that's not just in the business of keeping his promises, but to remember those things that he did for us. So to remember what he has done when we're in that season, when we're at that fork in the road, and we just don't think, we don't hear the dial tone, or we're not so sure that when we're reaching for the handrail, if he's there, he's always there. He doesn't change, we change. And so tonight we're going to take some time. This is a 25-minute presentation that we're going to take about 45 minutes to do. And so, I want us to just reflect, all the time. If you're in circles like this, where people, they find out there's a pro-Israel event, and typically, and there's folks in this audience tonight that they go to all the conferences, they buy all the DVDs, they tune in, and if it has to do with Israel, they just can't seem to quench their appetite on it. And invariably, if wherever you go, if you listen to a pro-Israel speaker, somewhere in the equation, this passage is considered a cornerstone passage, is considered kind of the front end of the thread of the biblical mandate that you can follow all the way through every book in the Bible to the back end, and you can see the Lord's plans and purposes of what he's doing to and through Israel. But when Pastor Bilch was in San Antonio in January at our leadership summit, I said what I'm about to say. I said, if 10 people quote Genesis 12:3, 9 of them leave off the last line. And the person that followed me quoted Genesis 12:3 and left off the last line. He said, I'll bless those that bless thee, I'll curse thee that curse thee. But there's a lot packed into that last line, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And I think if we just take just a glimpse at that, we will have our faith rekindled. We'll be inspired. We will see what the Lord is doing, to and through Israel, and in the fulfillment of that. But just how this tiny little nation, barely the size of New Jersey, is pouring out more blessings than the world can possibly contain. If it has to do with extending the quality of life, or extending the days of life, or enhancing the quality of life, you can just about guarantee that there's Israeli fingerprints either directly on it or not very far removed. So, but one of the things that we're going to ask you to do tonight, because there's a lot of folks here that are with us tonight because they are connected with Shaddai Ministries, maybe not with CUFI. We would love for you to stay connected with CUFI. You don't have to give a gift. We do 99.9% of our communication via email. So make your email as legible as possible, and we'll keep you connected. We'll let you know when there's a piece of legislation pending, and we'll let you know if there's another event. We'll let you know when we have student sponsorships where we need college students, where other people will pay their way to go to the Washington, D.C. summit that Pastor Bilch just talked about a little bit, where they'll have that life-changing experience. I'm going to show you just a very short overview video so that you can kind of check our oil and see if we are a resource that you would like to use as you try to mobilize others to join you in your trying to amplify your voice and have a greater, deeper impact on behalf of Israel. And then we're going to jump right in and go on with our message tonight.
CUFI was born in February 2006 with support from 400 faith leaders. Miraculously, the vision caught fire, and 5 months later, more than 3,000 people assembled in our nation's capital for the first annual CUFI Washington Summit. In 2008, we launched CUFI on Campus to combat the rising tide of anti-Semitism on America's college campuses. Since then, more than 4,000 students have been trained and equipped to defend Israel and their Jewish peers on hundreds of campuses across the country. We are now the largest pro-Israel campus organization in America, with a presence on nearly 300 campuses. Then, in 2009, we began leading pastor leadership tours to Israel and began to see our numbers and impact grow as each trip transformed pastors from spiritual pilgrims into passionate Christian Zionists, and many became our most dedicated grassroots activists. As of now, CUFI has taken more than 900 pastors to Israel over the past 10 years. With the Lord's help and dedicated grassroots activists, CUFI reached 1 million members in 2012. From there, we have grown exponentially. We reached 2 million members in 2015, then 3 million in 2016. We crossed the 4 million mark at the beginning of 2018, and within 10 more months, CUFI broke 5 million members by December 2018. As our size grew, so did our influence. Everyone, including Israel's enemies, began to sit up and take notice as CUFI became a political powerhouse.
Through Christians United for Israel, more than 3.3 million believers have raised their voices, have not been silent in support of Israel. And you can be heard in every city and town across America and in every office on Capitol Hill. And rest assured, the man down the street at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue hears you too.
CUFI's transformation into a heavyweight in Washington began to speed up when we threw our influence behind the Taylor Force Act, which was passed after CUFI members sent more than 1 million emails to Congress.
Our first goal today is to thank the leadership, the staff, and most importantly you, the members and friends of CUFI, for your early, strong, and obviously effective support of the Taylor Force Act.
We played a key role in helping several pro-Israel members of the President's administration win tough confirmation battles in the Senate.
Thank you for all you did to help get my friend Mike Pompeo confirmed as our new Secretary of State.
With our newfound size and influential voice, when Israel is threatened in any way, CUFI is poised to deliver a strong counterpunch, and our impact is being felt and seen in the halls of power.
Thank you for always standing with Israel. You are truly among our greatest friends in the world. I cherish that friendship.
For decades, America has been the backbone of Israel's support in the world. Well, the backbone of that backbone is the support of millions of devout Christians across this great country. More than any other Christian organization, CUFI works year after year to make that backbone stronger and straighter than ever.
This year, we are charging full steam ahead to build on the momentum of the last year. 2018 was our best year yet, but with 5 million passionate pro-Israel Christians standing up and raising our voices in unison, we are confident that 2019 will be even better.
The favor of God is with this organization. Listen to it, enemies of Israel. We're coming for you.
God has granted us a unique role to play during this critical time in Israel and America's history. We dare not waste a single opportunity.
Let us renew our finest efforts. Let us be courageous in this fight. Let us not be afraid of those who oppose us. Let us recognize that God is with us. Therefore, nothing is impossible to us. I believe the best is yet to be.
That man, I've watched him when nobody knew he was being watched. You know, I watched him waiting for the shoe to drop, and joked, you know, in the church before that I had the spiritual gift of critical cynicism, and you know, and I just was sure that, and I just watched him, and you know what? I concluded there's no guile in that man. He is an amazing fusion of authority and humility at the same time. We're trying to coax him out of his shell, get him to say what he means and stop beating around the bush all the time. But but I have no doubt that he's been appointed and anointed to be the carrier and the caster of the vision for Christians United for Israel, and it's an honor to be part of his team. There's a couple of flaws in that video that I just need to kind of clarify before we move on. One of them is, it says that we were 6 million. It took us 13 years to hit 5 million. We hit 5 million members in December of 2018. On May 14th, we were able to confirm that we hit 6 million. And right as soon as I finally got our office to give me the updated video that said 6 million, from May 14th, we hit 6 million. On June 27th, we hit 7 million. And a week ago today, we were able to confirm that we were at 7.1 million members. So we've reached the point of critical mass. And Pastor Hagee was right. We're not just coming after Israel's enemies; they're coming after us as well. And they make white noise trying to distract us, and they buzz around trying to take our eye off the target. But I really wish I could give them all Starbucks gift cards and thank them for coming out, because they help to make our point. When all they can really do is bring vitriol and hate, and their prejudice is absolutely unveilable. They make our case for us as effectively as we can. And so it's just, I don't mean to make light of it. They have evil intentions, but it's very easy to shine light on the underbelly of that, and for people to really see what it is. And their lies are a house of cards, and it doesn't take a very strong breeze for it to collapse on itself. So, we were talking about this Genesis 12:3, and what I really, really want folks to see, this message is not to impress you with how cool and slick the inventions are, and they are cool and slick, and they're amazing. They're mind-boggling, the innovation. And if you take a look at what drives the innovation, it's necessity. It's necessity. If you take a look at, the land that Israel inherited, it's a pretty gnarly piece of geography. Her number one natural resource is limestone rock, and her biggest body of water is the Dead Sea. So that's what you have to start with. Your desert land, that you can't grow kale in if you're lucky. And so, that's what she's starting with. So it's not just to try to build a case on Genesis 12:3. I'll bless those that bless thee, I'll curse thee that curse thee, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed, or in you all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Let's not just be impressed with the fact that, yes, all the families of the earth are being blessed through her innovations, but let's take it a little deeper and look at what the motivation is behind those innovations. Look at what the heart is, because if you take a look at what's driving their innovations, you can actually get a glimpse of the real heart of Israel. Again, if it has to do with extending the days of life or enhancing the quality of life, there's a roadmap that every young Israeli embarks on. And there is, yes, I've got to make a living. It's not such a bad thing if it's a fairly lucrative living, so that I can provide not only for my family, but provide comfortably for my family. And hey, you know what would be great? If I can make the world a better place in the same process. What if I can do something that's going to meet my needs to sustain my family, and at the same time we're leaving the world a better place for our grandkids than the one that we inherited? Take a look at the motivation behind the innovations. And then, there's also, what Pastor Biltz didn't talk about was that we had a lot of folks crashing our party in Washington, D.C. There were folks that mobilized, and they were there to try to mute us, to try to distract people from hearing. Because our message is Israel has the right to exist, and they take exception to that. They don't believe Israel does have the right to exist. They have a false narrative with a fictitious history that they stand on. And one of the main things that they do to try to really gain credibility, and I believe that we have a friend here from South Africa, if I'm not mistaken, and unfortunately, some of the chapters in South Africa's history have been hijacked and rewritten to try to lend legitimacy and credibility to this new movement, where they are actually seeking to boycott Israel. And they're trying to give it the appearance and the window dressings of harmless, nonviolent, politically correct platform to delegitimize, discredit, and ultimately demonize and actually dismantle the state of Israel. And that infrastructure is the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. It is the BDS campaign, and the backbone of its infrastructure can be found on university campuses. I love this state. I've lived in this state. My parents were married and buried in the state of Washington. And I have a family connection to the state of Washington, but you don't live but a stone's throw from one of the most anti-Semitic zones in this nation. And we don't need to belabor that, but I'm just saying to fly an Israeli flag, is going to have some interesting conversations sparked from it sometimes. And that being said, you've got university campuses that BDS is a pretty strong, it's a pretty strong factor. It's part of the rhetoric. It's even spilled beyond the college campuses and into the political institutions and political officials as well. But they would have you believe that boycotting Israel is just going to pressure her to come to the table so that she can work out negotiations with the Palestinians. When was the last time there was a Palestinian sitting at the other side of the table? There hasn't been. So the question is, and again, a lot of you sit at the feet of Pastor Biltz, and you can probably coach, you can probably be a teacher's aide on that 6-week study on the one letter in the Hebrew alphabet. But I would suggest that even you, if you're around the water cooler at work, if your kids come home from college and they're sitting at the table, if you're at a family reunion or just a holiday outing with, a picnic and folks either from the neighborhood or folks from your extended family the last week on the 4th of July, if you did a straw poll and you say, if I say Israel, what's the one word that comes to mind? And people will, most of them are going to leap out with history or religion or conflict or security. And I would venture to say that if you did that with 100 people, not one of them would say innovation.
When you look at the NASDAQ, companies are listed from around the world. There's one country, though, that truly stands out, and that is Israel.
And Israel is the fastest growing, one of the most dynamic, entrepreneurial, and innovation-based economies on the planet.
The sky is the limit for inventors in Israel.
Israel has been a remarkable achiever in terms of technological innovation.
Israel has developed some of the world's leading technology.
Even if you don't live in Israel, chances are you have something that was made here.
If you just look at it on a daily basis, how much stuff do you use in your daily life that has its origins in Israel? It's rather remarkable.
Many of the microprocessors invented by Intel were designed in Israel.
Nowhere in the world outside of Silicon Valley will you find more technology startups.
People come from all over the world to look for Israeli technology.
Warren Buffett shelled out more than $4 billion for Iskar Metalworking, the largest purchase the legendary investor has made outside the United States.
I understand that their facilities are incredible, but I would expect that.
Intel developed here, HP as a center here, Google is very successful here, Microsoft as well as in research and development.
If you actually do the math, Microsoft is almost as much an Israeli company as we are a U.S. company.
This country has been such a beta site or a laboratory for solving both national and international problems since its inception.
The technology coming out of Israel is being used to connect the world, green the planet, save lives, and have fun.
Wow. Wow.
For instance, Kinect lets me use my body as the controller. This very cool technology was developed in Israel and then bought by Microsoft.
It's a workout.
In a way, Israel is known to everybody as a center of innovation, as a place where you can find more innovation than anywhere else in the world per capita.
If you look at countries that are represented in these stock exchanges, the ranking today is number 1, of course, the United States. Number 2 is China, and number 3 is Israel. The US, China, Israel. Looking at our size, how is it that Israel, with its 7 million people, has the 3rd largest group of companies traded in New York?
This is an amazing fact for a tiny country to actually eclipse all the nations of Europe in the creativity of its entrepreneurial leadership.
In January this year, the Bloomberg Economic Forum, they do an index on innovation every year, and Israel was able to climb to number 5. And for the 5th year in a row, South Korea retained its number 1 slot. And it was curious. So folks in Israel, they actually asked their ambassador from South Korea to Israel, what do you attribute this to? And he just confessed. He said, you know what? we did a study to try to figure out why the Jews were geniuses. And the only common denominator that we could come up with is that they studied the Talmud. So we made it mandatory in all of our public schools that the students in their public schools have to study the Talmud. Could just be a coincidence. Maybe I'm pulling a hamstring, reaching really far. I don't know. You know, the British White Paper, one of the things that Great Britain wasn't really keen and thrilled about giving up their quasi-colonial position in the intersection of North Africa. They did not want to abandon Israel. They had promised to hand it over, but they came up with every excuse that they possibly could to stay as long as possible. And one of the reasons was in the British White Paper, and that was there's not enough water in the land to sustain any kind of substantial immigration. And so Israel had to go out and figure out how to remedy that so that that could no longer be a gate that would be held closed. The problem is, and this is where we're going to get into some history, and this is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle that most people, don't have so that they can put together the big picture. It's also one of the most critical pieces of history to thwart and overcome the allegations that Israel's a land-stealing, territory-expanding occupier. Until May 14th of 1948, there was not one Jew living on 1 square inch of land of then Palestine that had not been legally purchased in a transaction at absolutely through-the-nose highway robbery, grossly inflated prices. And the reason why that was the case was because any Arab that got caught selling, quality, valuable land to a Jew could plan on being hurled off the top of a tall building within a day or two. The only way you could get away with it is if you made a fool out of them by just absolutely fleecing him with inflated prices for land that was deemed virtually worthless. Again, the deserts that couldn't grow a tumbleweed, or in most cases, because the land had fallen into such neglect, like the Hula Valley or the Esdraelon Valley, malaria-infested swampland. Now, Pastor Biltz and I were driving around today, and this has come up in this presentation before, where it's very easy to get so wrapped up like the South Koreans did in thinking that, wow, Israel's full of these Jewish geniuses. All that we're looking at today, yes, Israel is full of Jewish geniuses, but they're part of the process for the Lord to do what he said he was going to do. And if you take a look, at all the things, all the promises that the Lord said that he was going to do, and we could do a whole 90-minute presentation on God as a promise keeper, and Pastor, we did that at his church not very long ago. And if you take, why did he bring them from the four corners of the earth? And, what did they do to earn it or deserve it? How obedient were they? How faithful were they? How did they possibly, come to have that coming to them? And the answer is they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything except be disobedient. But in his graciousness and his compassion and his mercy, he did it because he said he was going to do it. Take a look at Ezekiel 36. He didn't do it for their namesake. He did it for his holy namesake that they had profaned. He did it because he said he was going to do it. And so when you take a look at the Hula Valley from 1920, malaria infested, these guys have mosquito nets on. They don't know if they're going to contract it and die, but they know that they're investing to leave the land a better place than they inherited it for the next generation. This is the Hula Valley today. And so, funny story, and again, it speaks to, to being remembering of, that the Lord is doing this. The story goes that this fellow was being toured around by one of the greatest, agriculture experts in Israel, and he's showing the vineyards, and he's showing the orchards, and he's showing the banana fields, and going on and on and on and on. And he ends with, this all is like the Garden of Eden, but it wasn't very long ago that it was a desert. And the fellow, kind of stops him and respectfully says, well, you realize that God did all of this, not you guys. And the fellow said, well, you should have seen it when God had it all by himself. They invented drip irrigation technology, use 40% of the water for more than half again. You take a look, if I told you that this was a picture in Nevada, Ezekiel 36, and the desolate land shall be tilled where it lay desolate in the sight of all that pass by it. It doesn't look like Nevada anymore. It looks the exact same place. It looks like Napa. The desert literally has become like the Garden of Eden. And they shall say that this land was desolate, has become like the Garden of Eden. Genesis 13, lift up your eyes from where you are, look north and south and east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your descendants. Everybody said together. Forever. The Lord in whom your faith rests. When he uses the word forever, how long do you think he means? Forever. You sure until he changes his mind? Zechariah 8. We're not going to go through this whole thing, but I guarantee, how many of you have been to Israel? Okay, not as I thought every hand would go up. When you go to Israel and when you go back to Israel, doesn't matter how far behind schedule you are, when you get to the old Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, you have to stop. Your whole group has to keep their eyes open and their Bible shut, except one person has to read Zechariah 8 in its entirety out loud. And people will be weeping before you are done. You will see old men and old women walking by with a staff in their hand because of great age. You'll see boys and girls playing in the streets. I had a group of 32 pastors standing right there, and the kids realized that we were in a very reverent, somber moment, and they decided to start kicking their kickball right into our group, and we'd kick it back, and we were actually playing with the boys and girls as Zechariah 8 was being read. Amos 9, Benjamin Netanyahu quoted Amos 9 when he closed one of his recent addresses at the United Nations. I'll bring my exiled people of Israel back from distant lands, and they will rebuild their ruined cities and live in them again. They'll plant vineyards and gardens. They'll eat their crops and drink their wines. I will firmly plant them there in their own land, and they will never again. When he says never again, how long do you think he means? Never again be uprooted from the land I've given them, says the Lord your God. Again, water, when you're talking about a desert, again, the biggest body of water is the Dead Sea. 86% of her water she reclaims, leading the world in desalination. We'll take a look at that in a moment. U.S. lagging way behind. 1% of the water that we use, we reclaim. You take a look at this project. This was just approved and is moving forward just the early part of this year. It's the Red to Dead Sea. And I'm not going to try, I don't want to, if I gave you all the moving parts on this project, it would be about as exciting as watching paint dry. But just suffice it to say this. First of all, Israel has cracked the code on desalinizing seawater. There's just one big problem when you desalinize seawater. 30% of it is a brine solution that is fairly toxic and doesn't have a great number of uses. Put a pin in that, and let's take a look at the Dead Sea. People are harvesting water out of the Jordan that feeds the Dead Sea, and so the Dead Sea is dropping like a rock in its level of water, creating sinkholes and all kinds of problems. So here we have, you've got all of southern Israel, you've got Jordan, you've got Egypt, and they've got water problems galore. Israel has cracked the code on desalinizing seawater, and so the theory is, and they put this project up to the test, and now they've concluded that they can take water from the Red Sea. The 1,200-foot gravitational drop will run 2 power plants, which will provide electricity to southern Israel, to southern Jordan, and also to Egypt, to both Palestinian Arabs and Jewish Israelis. They'll also run 2 desalination plants, and the brine solution that usually people don't know what to do with is going to go into the Dead Sea to start replenishing the water level there. Desalination plant, we just had one open up in Carlsbad, California, a few miles from San Diego. It should have taken 3 years to build, but it took 7 years to build because the environmentalists didn't want it to get built. The day that it had its ribbon cut to open it up and turn it on was at the peak of California's worst drought in its recorded history. I live in Sacramento, California, same problem that the folks in San Diego had. If you have your sprinklers going, if you were even living in an area where you could still water your lawn, there were people that were making a pretty good living by painting dead lawns green in California. I'm serious. If you were driving down the street and you had a green lawn, if you looked really close, it was a really weird shade of green. But there were some that you could still do some watering, maybe wash your car or water your flowers. But if you got caught with any water running on the sidewalk into the gutter, $50 fine. And San Diego, all of a sudden, they fire this thing up, 55 million gallons a day that are now trying to figure out what to do with. And it wasn't even a day later that Anaheim looked at it and said, you know what, we'd kind of like one of those. My friend Qasim Hafiz, who is a former Muslim of Pakistani descent, he's now a born-again Christian and on staff with CUFI as a Middle East analyst. He's spoken at El Shaddai before. He talked me into buying a soda stream. I have never been a tree-hugging green person, but I all of a sudden did the math on how many plastic bottles my wife and I contribute to the environment, and I don't know if they really get recycled. But the soda stream devices, and we can just walk over and do fresh flavored seltzer water, and it's fantastic. Now, the SodaStream inventors, they were trying to spare the world with a bunch of useless plastic bottles, and became so popular that Pepsi-Cola decided to pay them $3.2 billion to buy the rights for SodaStream. What did they do with the money? Again, what's the motivation behind Israeli innovation? They took the money, now they were building a fleet of ships that are designed to harvest trash out of the oceans. Israel's just developed what looks like a plastic shrink wrap, but it's entirely biodegradable. So all of the things that we buy are that either clothes or toys or food comes in will all be totally biodegradable here in no time. When Israel started their metro system, it took 81 minutes or 80 minutes to get from one end to the other through their metro system. They developed basically a computer system that synchronizes the traffic lights with the metro system, and it cut it in half. And now New York has just adopted that same exact system. So people that have been navigating New York traffic for years, their metro system will probably become one of the most efficient in the country. When it comes to the battlefield, our own tanks, we just dropped nearly $200 million earlier this year to deploy basically a miniaturized version of Israel's Iron Dome. I don't know if you know what Iron Dome is. Iron Dome is 3 pieces of American military technology that Israel merged into one. It detects an incoming projectile. In a nanosecond, it determines if that projectile is going to land harmlessly over there or in a populated area over here, and it makes the determination which of the two. If it's going to land over here, it sends up 2 missiles that are synchronized to take out that incoming projectile. The first one, if it misses, the second one learns from the first one's mistake. So it has about a 90% success ratio. They miniaturize that to where it can actually be deployed on tanks. Another piece of military technology is something that we don't really think about. Just when I arrived at the airport today, I turned on the radio. I'm in the parking garage, at the rental car terminal at the airport, and of course, my radio didn't work, and I realized I'm going to make an audio recording of that for this presentation, so people can just connect the dots. That if you're listening to the radio, if you're on your cell phone, if you drive through a tunnel or into a parking garage, you lose your connection. Well, that's exactly what happens when IDF forces try to do subterranean combat with terrorists that have chosen to work through the terror tunnels. They get down there, and those tunnels, I don't know how much you know about them, but they're a maze. They're not just a tunnel that goes from like a straight line. They have all kinds of dead ends and death traps that have been built into them to make it difficult, if not nearly impossible, to navigate through. And the problem has been that when you deploy troops into them, there's no way for them to communicate. And Israel was able to develop a technique, a system, where they could actually deploy essentially a cell network in that tunnel so that the first guy can communicate with the last guy. And everybody knows what they're encountering, what they're going to do, what the plan is. That may sound pretty boring unless you're the parent of a soccer team from Thailand that went out on a field trip last December, and the rains came and the tide rose, and all of a sudden that they were trapped, or last July. And so, they tried, even one of Thailand's Navy SEALs, one of their best trained, was killed trying to get them out of there. And the fellows that I just talked about in Israel that developed that communication technique, they looked at each other and they said, proprietary or no proprietary, we got to let the world know that we have this. And they deployed it, and they brought it over there, and within hours, that soccer team was liberated and saved. Arizona, a few years ago, in 2010 or 2011, Gabrielle Giffords, then Congresswoman, was doing a rally in Tucson, and some whack job came out and shot her, killed a number of others that were with her, and it was credited that the Israeli bandage saved her life. A lot of folks don't realize that our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, if you take a look at a chart, the gunshot wounds that they've received, that has not changed. If you take a look at the ratios of the number of troops that are on the battlefield and compare it against how many people have been shot, that percentage has remained steady. The number that has changed dramatically is the fatalities from those gunshot wounds. And the link that can be connected to it was when the U.S. military started deploying the Israeli bandage. The Israeli bandage has a blood clotting agent that's built into the material, and it has a built-in tourniquet that's on it so that one man can apply it to himself or another with one hand. There's actually the video that you can find of an anti-aircraft gunner that got shot himself, and he's firing with one hand. He busts out his bandage, rips it open, applies it, puts in the tourniquet key, and he doesn't even miss a beat. He doesn't, they don't even have to be taken off the battlefield. It is life-saving, and it's a game changer. Does anybody here go to the gun range very often, or here? This is yours. So another little device that I think is kind of cool. When you went to Israel, did you go onto a kibbutz or buy a kibbutz? If you're going to go to the cool chocolate factory, you got to drive through the dairy farm to get there, and you see all those Holsteins. Well, there's if you I think now they've got a little competition, but up until very recently, if you're going to order a pizza from a national chain, don't need to drop names, but suffice it to say that virtually any national pizza chain, if you ordered a pizza, the mozzarella cheese on that pizza came from Roswell, New Mexico, the largest mozzarella factory in the country. And it's because they have down in Roswell, New Mexico, they've got a vast dairy industry down there. Well, I'm down there doing a pastor's meeting, and I told the folks that were putting the pastor's meeting together that this is going to be about BDS, this is going to be about educating them about the evils of BDS, and this is about getting ready to come up with an anti-BDS bill that we want to have passed in the state of New Mexico. And so if you know of any state legislators that might be interested in coming, we could use their help when it comes time to submit this. And I'm all done, and this guy that looks like he should be part of ZZ Top with this beard that goes down to his belt buckle, he gets up and he goes, I don't have any time to spare today, but if you've got a few minutes, I'd like to show you something. And we hop in his truck and we drive out to his dairy farm. He's a state senator in New Mexico. And he shows me this dairy farm, and he points to these little contraptions that are on the heel, one of the hind heels of every one of the cows. And he said that's an Israeli Fitbit. He said when the cow comes into the milking carousel, the computer detects exactly who she is. She knows how many steps she's been taking on an average every day, knows how much milk she's been producing every day, knows how much protein is in the milk every day, knows how much fat's in the milk every day, and it can determine, it can calculate if that particular individual needs to have its food supplement. It can count the steps, and if it's got way fewer than normal, then when that cow goes to leave, the only gate that'll open, it goes to the infirmary so that she can go and get treated. If it's double or triple the number of steps, it means that she's likely in heat trying to find a bull, and the only gate that'll open for her is to the breeding pen. He goes over and he grabs his hose off of the wall, and he says, we don't use any chemicals in here, and he sprays this gun, and it smells like it just rained in a rainforest. All they use is ionization to sterilize the dairy farm. And he said, all of this is Israeli. And he said, I'll be damned if anybody's going to take this away from me. Count me in, we're going to write that bill. Those are his words, not mine. I'm quoting him verbatim. Water gen. This is a device that just, if you have a source of electricity, whether it's batteries, a generator, a solar panel, you set it down and it immediately starts creating drinkable water, 150 gallons or more, depending on how big it is, in the middle of nowhere. And I live 60 miles from Paradise, California, where we had the campfire. All the water sources were contaminated. Even the contaminated water was being drawn to fight the fires. First responders and victims that were still lingering in the area had no place to go to get water. And Israel deployed a number of water gens right there in Paradise and the surrounding areas so that those first responders could actually be sustained. You just see in South Africa. The South African parts of it are having horrible droughts, and water gen has just been deployed to many parts. Thousands and thousands of homes and schools and different community centers now have fresh, drinkable water where they didn't have any before. And it's an endless supply as long as they can provide electricity. I just want to inject again, going back to when we talked about the BDS movement, how they want to challenge you to think that you have Palestinian blood on your hands because you have the audacity to consume Israeli products or to use Israeli technology. This part of this presentation is to emphasize the absurdity of anybody suggesting that you would boycott Israeli technology. One of the things, if I count back, I don't know if it was 8 or 7 or 6 years ago, that Pastor Mark and I had to suffer for Jesus and go do events on Maui. And we did presentations back to back. And my presentation was Myths and Facts. Is Israel an apartheid state? And when I was asked to do the presentation, I didn't know that there would be about 4 dozen black South Africans in the audience sitting right in front of me. And I had to break down why Israel is not an apartheid state and what apartheid really is, and what an abominable lie and blood libel it is to try to cast that aspersion on Israel. And I was encouraged and cited a big sigh of relief when they came up and said, that was exactly spot on, that's exactly right. Again, when we take a look at the motivation behind Israeli innovation, there's other ingredients too. It's not just compassion. It's not just healing the world. Sometimes there's a little chutzpah involved also. And Eli Beer is the embodiment of that. Eli Beer was riding shotgun as a paramedic in an ambulance service. And he saw, depending on what time of day it is, and this is the case in any country. It's the case right here in Tacoma. It's the case in Sacramento. It's the case anywhere. There's people in this room, I have no doubt, because I'm even if you just count myself, I'll validate the statement that I'm going to make. But there are people in this room that know that there's a situation that is so serious that you dial 911 to call an ambulance, and that ambulance cannot get there soon enough. And depending on what crisis it is, depending on what happened, there are often a number of minutes that make up the window of the likelihood of whether you're going to survive or the quality of that, how that's going to be. And when you start getting into 15, 20 minutes, you start gambling and playing havoc with that window. And Eli Beer sitting in the ambulance, especially during rush hour, and it's somebody that they know by the nature of the call that came into the dispatcher, they know that person really needs attention within 3 or 4 minutes, and they also know that with traffic, they're not going to get there for 15 or 20 minutes. And they're sitting there in traffic, and the guy's seeing scooters zipping by. They're going between the vehicles. They're hopping up on the sidewalk and going around them. And what are they doing? They're delivering pizzas. And if they can get it while it's fresh and hot, they know they're going to get their tip. And Eli has this brilliant idea. He says, why don't, our medic bag will fit in that same box. Why don't we just get some scooters and we'll just do that? And the fellow that owned the ambulance company or headed it up said, that is the stupidest idea that I've ever heard. And so Eli went out and he recruited some volunteers that agreed to get certified as paramedics. They agreed to identify a neighborhood that they would have the parameters on. They all got scanners, and the chutzpah kicked in where they would eavesdrop on the ambulance dispatches. And time after time after time after time, when the ambulance would pull up, there'd be a scooter there with a paramedic that kept that person alive until the ambulance could get there. Today, they have 8,000 volunteers that respond to about 2,500 calls every single day. They're made up of Muslims that go into Christian and Jewish neighborhoods, Christians that go into Jewish and Muslim neighborhoods, and Jews that go into Christian and Muslim neighborhoods. They all work cooperatively together for the sake of each other. They don't charge the people that receive their services a dime, and none of them make a dime. If they demonstrate their commitment and their quality of performance, then they'll be given a scooter and their training. But it's all done on a volunteer basis. They've got their response time down to an average of 3 minutes. They usually make it in about 90 seconds, and they've tripled the survival rate of the CPR, practice that we have here in the States. In January this year, a 2-year study was released from IceCure. IceCure started in 2006 with benign breast cancer tumors. If we did a poll in here of how many people had their circle of friends or family impacted by breast cancer, a lot of hands would go up. I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, and I didn't know it. I had the perfect mom that was stable and nothing but just positive and supportive. And I came home one day, and it was a woman that I did not know. And it was because her best friend and sister had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And at that time, in that season, that was a death sentence. And until very recently, anyone that was going to try to combat breast cancer knew that it was going to take some very radical, very intrusive measures. IceCure came out in 2006, and they started working with benign tumors, using liquid hydrogen to actually freeze the tumor and kill the cells and see if the body would acclimate it and if it would be assimilated into the system. They moved on to malignant cancerous tumors. And just this of January this year, a 2-year study was released. 146 women. In 2 years, only one of them had their cancer return. And no, don't clap yet. Don't clap yet. It's a 20-minute outpatient practice service. You go in and you get it done, and you can still pick up the poodle from the groomer and do the grocery store on your way home. It was just about 2 weeks ago approved for, it didn't just pass the study, the American Medical Association just made it available as an alternative treatment here in the United States. Israel just figured out how to not just print a facsimile of a human heart, they actually printed it with human cells, with ventricles and valves and chambers, life size. They were able to do it successfully with a rabbit heart, then they just did it with a human heart. We're just within arm's reach of having organs that don't have any possibility of being rejected by the recipient of just game-changing technology. Again, it's not how cool and slick the innovations are, it's the motivation behind it, the heart of Israel, the healing of the world. And while all of this is going on, while all these blessings are being poured out upon us, we have just reached the highest level in this nation's history of anti-Semitic acts. If I take a look at the inventions, how is it possible that a people group that don't even make up 0.25% of the world population, 0.22, not even 1/4 of 1% of the world population, but year in after year out, they come up with these technological contributions to the international community, Nobel Prizes that run circles around others. They don't make up 2% of the US population, but they endure over 50% of the hate crimes in this nation. Some of these things have happened so frequently that we've allowed them to become white noise. And it was, it would be nearly boastful for me to lay out how the Lord used our organization and the leverage of millions of Christian evangelicals that will straighten their spine and confront their elected officials and say, we're watching how you vote, and we watch how you stand, and we see the positions that you take, and we're pro-Israel, and we vote people into office, and we vote people out of office. And it was with that leverage and might that when people that are in power and influence asked Pastor Hagee, why should the U.S. move the embassy to Israel? He gave his opinion. And David Friedman, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, credits CUFI as a significant catalyst of having that political promise made. Let's face it, the two things you got to remember. 1996, Congress passed the American Embassy Act. Clinton did not veto it. There was an asterisk in that act, though, to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And that asterisk said the executive administration holds the option to waiver every 6 months. And from 96, every person that ran for president promised to move the embassy, and every person that won the presidency used the waiver and kicked the can down the road every 6 months until recently. And the other thing that we need to clarify is President Trump did not make Jerusalem the capital of Israel. King David did that 3,000 years ago. All President Trump did is recognize the reality. And when you're going to use your voice like that, when you're going to speak, knowing that what you say and what position you take is what you're going to be held accountable to for God, with God one day, then you get the attention of people that stand against you. And there's a lot of folks that don't like the fact that we are pro-Israel and that we believe Israel has the right to exist. And they mobilized in great force to try to shut us down at our DC summit. And they'll be showing up at events like this to try to discourage people like you from considering, the evils of, or to make you try to think that Israel's a land-stealing, territory-expanding occupier. And so you need to remember, just, when you are combating on Israel's behalf, you're not on the front lines of Gaza. You're not on the front lines of the Golan Heights or Syria. You're battling against lies. And when you're battling against lies, truth is your weapon and facts are your ammunition. And it's great that you have a command of the scripture. Oftentimes the person that you're going to be talking to doesn't give that any credence. You need to know the facts. And when you start looking at the facts of the moral high ground that Israel has taken, of the tireless, endless concessions that she's made to try to extend an olive branch to her neighbors, you will just become better and stronger, more convicted, more galvanized. You'll be given greater resolve, and you'll become much more articulate.
Today, we are seeing the rise of an old enemy wearing a new mask. Once, anti-Semitism was displayed by those in white hoods or wearing the twisted cross of the swastika. But today, this old hatred hides in plain sight. Only a decade ago, anti-Semites were shunned and despised. Now, this appalling bigotry has a platform on Twitter and is applauded in the public square. Anti-Semites rail against Israel on our college campuses. They break bread with elected officials. They commit acts of heinous violence in our cities. They may not wear the uniforms of their forefathers, but today's anti-Semites are more dangerous than ever. Today, anti-Semites wrap themselves in the flags of faith, social justice, and liberty. They contort the very concepts Americans hold so dear. So let us not be blind to the anti-Semitism that hides in plain sight. Words like anti-Zionism serve as fig leaves for bigotry. For decades, support for Israel transcended party, ideology, and faith in this country. But today, the loss of objective truth and the acceptance of moral ambiguity have enabled anti-Semitic movements to spread like cancer. CUFI was built for such a time as this. We will not let this darkness dim our light, for Christians are a light unto the world, and Israel is a light unto the nations. So shine bright. Shine the light on anti-Semitism that hides in plain sight, from churches to college campuses, from state capitals to Congress. We at Christians United for Israel seek to be a light in the darkness. As light conquers darkness, so shall we conquer this anti-Semitic scourge. Join us. Don't curse the darkness. Shine the light.
I always thought that I wanted to have a house with a skylight in it. Whenever I'd walk in others' houses that had skylights in it, I wanted one. When we did a walkthrough in the house that we ended up buying that I live in now, it had 3 skylights in it. And now that I have a skylight, I wish that I lived in a house that didn't have skylights in it. The skylight that I'm referring to is 4 feet by 4 feet. It's directly over our bed in our master bedroom. And it is fantastic on, when there's a a waning moon and it's just a sliver and you can see the stars, or in the morning you can see the bird perched on the pine tree that you can see the top of. But when there's a full moon, it is as though, all the lights in the room were on. And I cannot go to Walmart and go down to one of the aisles and buy myself a dark that I can plug in and flip the switch and all of a sudden all the light's gone. Because dark is just an absence of light. Dark is not an entity. Dark is an absence of light. There are people that would tell you that they're not anti-Semitic, they're just anti-Zionist. Well, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism because Zionism is simply a belief and a conviction that the Jewish people have the right to self-determination, just like any other people group do. And to deny them that right is a politically veiled form of anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism by itself is actually a sanitized, inaccurate term that I'm trying to train myself to stop using. Because one of the largest groups that would fit into that category are in the Arab Muslim nations who are themselves Semites. So it's a sanitized term so that you don't have to say what it actually is, and that is hatred of Jews. Because that's what it really is hatred of Jews. Another man that's spoken at El Shaddai not long ago is a very dear friend of mine, and that is Holocaust survivor Irving Roth. And last March, I had the pleasure and the honor of going along with Irving and 73 members of CUFI to Poland, where we visited the death camps, and including Auschwitz. And this is where he spent 8 months of his life when he was 15 years old. And he stood there with our group, and he had a cattle car behind him. At the end of the tracks on his left, what you see in the background of that photo is the gate where people would come in and they'd be separated, they'd be determined where they're going to go. And the tracks on the right that you can't see in the photograph end at what is the remains of then the crematoriums. And Irving drew from the words and teachings of Elie Wiesel, who actually stayed in Block 13 in Auschwitz with Irving. He was actually in the same block. And Irving's number is A10491. And Irving explained to this group, and I'll try to paraphrase it the best that I can. He said, right there you are looking at hell on earth when you're in Auschwitz. I don't know how many of you have ever done it. I don't know how I did it twice. I think everyone should visit the death camps once so that they can fully try to grasp what man is capable of doing to his fellow man. But if you take a look at the literal living hell on earth of Auschwitz and everything that happened to and through the Holocaust, and that is the extreme end of the spectrum, and you go all the way down to the shallow end of that spectrum to an elementary school in Sumner, Washington, where on the playground during recess, there's that kid that maybe he was held back a year. He's a little beefier than the others. He's got an attitude, and he's cracked the code on how easy it is to shake other kids down for their lunch money. And if you look at this as the light end of the spectrum, and this is the extreme end of the spectrum, in everything that could possibly happen between the two, there's only 4 kinds of people. There's the perpetrators, the victims, the bystanders, and the interveners. And the only thing that separates the bystander from the intervener is action. It could be the person at this end that decides that they know that if they get caught hiding a Jew, their whole family will be killed. And it could be down at this end where a kid just says, I don't care if I get beat up on my way to the bus stop. I'm telling the principal on you. I'm telling the yard marshal on you. In every one of those cases, it's either an intervener or a bystander. And I would ask you to look at CUFI to be your place where you can lock your arms and join your voice and mobilize with others. It could be as committed as going to Washington, D.C. with Pastor Mark in July, where we meet with our elected officials, or it could be as easy as getting an email that says there's a piece of legislation that right now we've got all the votes in Senate. We're trying to find a co-sponsor bill, a companion bill for the House of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. where we're telling the Department of Education, you can't turn a blind eye to anti-Semitic acts anymore under the auspices of academic freedom and political dialogue. The State Department defined what anti-Semitism is. You take a look at those, and if that happened on your campus, you have to take action. There are other ethnic groups that if anybody looks at them the wrong way, all the stops are pulled out. But you get a swastika scratched into your locker, and all of a sudden it's like, let's not overreact. Can't see anti-Semitism around every corner. So I would ask you, I would encourage you, if you haven't become a member of CUFI, it doesn't cost you a penny. Just fill this out as legibly as you can, and we'll let you know if there's another event in the area. If you want to host an event at your church, then we'll do that as well. But more importantly, we'll let you know when our DC Summit is coming. We need college students, and Pastor Biltz will tell you that when our college division, we broke our own record. Every year we bring 550 college students to Washington, D.C. This year we brought 650 college students to Washington, D.C., and we had to turn away another 100 because we had the resources, but they waited too long to apply. And so we are asking you to consider those young men and women that deserve to be invested in, and we'll sow into them. We'll get them to D.C., and they'll have those skills instilled in them on how to engage and affect our political fabric, the process, our elected officials, and they'll have that for the rest of their lives, for all of the social, geopolitical things that when they draw upon their Judeo-Christian moral compass that was built by sitting in churches like this, they'll have that for the rest of their life on knowing how to engage their elected official. And Pastor Biltz will tell you that when our campus division in DC pointed to the top 2 college students that were models of getting it done, they were both from El Shaddai Ministries. So let's build on that legacy. And if and when that piece of legislation is pending, then we're right now in the throes of working to get a congressional companion bill to the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. That's going to require people to call up their Congress representative and say, where you stand on this, we really want you to co-sponsor this. So it's just that simple. So, I've told this story before, and I'm going to, I've not been released. One of our speakers in D.C. was Dennis Prager, and he heard me tell this story once, and he said, don't ever address an audience without telling that story. And if you heard it before, grit your teeth because you're going to hear it again. But the first year that we went to D.C., we were planning on 1,000, prepared for 1,500. Two-front war broke out in 2006, Hamas to the south, Hezbollah to the north. And Christians, without any warning, without registering, they just came to D.C. to stand with Israel. 3,600 people showed up by the time registration closed. And it was amazing. And there were news trucks everywhere. That night we're clicking through the news. Every news station had us on there because Christians don't show up to D.C. in masses like that. And they were casting us as an idiotic caricature of ourselves because the media doesn't like Christians to be cast in a very good light. And the next year we had rules for the journalists. Can't come in the building without your credentials. Can't leave your designated specified area without a staffer. Can't interview anybody without that person knowing that they're going to be interviewed and getting that approved. And I'm walking through the main area, the foyer, through a sea of people, and I see somebody being interviewed. I don't see a staffer. I don't see any credentials, but I do see a number on her left forearm. And with as much disrespect as one can weave into their voice inflection, person says to this Holocaust survivor, how does it make you feel to know that after all you survived and endured, you do realize with Iran on the rise for nuclear weapons that your kids and grandkids will probably face the same thing? And she didn't bat an eye. She said, it's not the same thing. We were alone that time. We're not alone this time. That's every word, every image on this presentation, everything that this organization has tried to accomplish boils down to that. And if that's something that you can lock arms with, we would be honored to be by your side on that. So again, fill out the contact card as legibly as you can. We will not inundate you. We will not share your contact information with anyone else. We'll just let you know when there's an opportunity for your voice to be heard, for you to weigh in, and you can take 2 or 3 minutes out of your day to shift from being a bystander to being an intervener on standby. So on that note, thanks for letting me be a guest in this house. Pastor Mark.
Thank you so much, Randy. One of the things that was interesting when we went to go see Maria Cantwell, fortunately, Randy had given me the statistics. And so we go in and I let her know that, CUFI now has over 7 million members and they vote. And guess what? We have 114,000 CUFI members in Washington State. And her eyes, like, okay, tell me what you want. And then we go to Kim Schreier, who is in the 8th district, which most of us, I believe, are in Dave Reichert's old district. And we go in and I tell her, and guess what? Not only do we have 7 million people nationally and 114,000 in the state, we have 14,000 in your district, and we vote. And but the nice thing is we were talking about the anti-Semitism bill that's in the Senate we're trying to get into the House, how the Education Department needs to have the same as the State Department in defining what that is, so you won't see all these college campuses with all these horrible things happening. And she goes, well, guess what? I'm Jewish, and I went to Berkeley, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and we're gonna, be a part of this. So it's someone that I believe we could very strongly help co-sponsor the House bill. But anyway, as you know, you can see the Jewish motto is Tikkun Olam, which means to repair the world. And that's what the Jews have been doing for thousands of years. They try to reach out and repair the world, and I believe that's why Satan is so much opposed to what they do. One of the fascinating things, this was what one of the Jewish sages said. As you know, God loves the whole world, right? And Israel was to be a nation of priests. And so they were to make atonement for themselves on Yom Kippur. And then 5 days later on Sukkot, they were to make atonement for the nations of the world. So what does the devil do? He gets the nations of the world to destroy the very temple that God was using to make atonement for them. And one of the Jewish sages says if they had known, they would have put their armies around Jerusalem to protect it. But that's what anti-Semitism does. It just totally warps your mind. You don't have a right perspective. But with that said, Jill, do we have that? We have the last song ready. Okay, let's stand.
ירושלים שזכה ושם נהושת ושלור עלו לקשירי אני כינור ירושלים שזכה ושם נהושת ושלור עלו
That is John Hagee's daughter, and that's his son. You like the Western Wall behind him? That's the green screen I want here. Something like that. Oh, who wants to go to Washington, D.C. and join us next July? Woo! It's awesome. I believe you have cards to fill out. I believe we're going to have ushers at the back. Is that right? You can drop them in the bucket if you want to stay in contact. But it's very important. It makes a big difference. Believe me, when there's a bill and then we can let everybody know to call your senator or your congressperson, it can really make a difference. So thank you very much. Let's give Brady a big hand. Oh, and if you are visiting here and you don't come here, we meet every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. And it's a special weekend coming up this weekend. Who knows what this Saturday is? Is anybody here knows what date it is? No, what date it is? And he's not coming this Saturday. This Saturday is the 17th of Tammuz. That means this Saturday is the very day they worship the golden calf. And but anyway, it's very significant. We'll be talking about that. See you on Shabbat at 10 o'clock. Bye.